Parenting is amazing. It can be so beautiful and so hard. We all really want to raise healthy, balanced, faithful children, but,
we're trying to pass on this beautiful faith, and we're working out our own salvation right here every day with our kids.
My name is Christian Gonzalez. I'm the father of 3 wild, beautiful daughters.
And I'm Elissa Bjeletich Davis, and I have a whole house full of kids from tweens to young adults, and some already out in the world.
And we're here to join you on this journey through the highs and lows of parenting, amidst snotty noses, messy rooms, and busy schedules.
We don't have it all figured out, but we're in it with you. And our message is simple. Dear parents, you're not alone.
Welcome to Trials and Triumphs from the Trenches. Good morning, Elissa. Well, I guess it's good morning for me. It's not really good morning for you anymore. It's barely not morning anymore. More for you, though.
It's just barely not morning. I'm just an hour ahead. So good afternoon to you, sir.
Yes, good barely not morning. Well, it's good to see you again. Here we are doing the thing again.
That's right, doing it
I
again.
love it. Love it. Well, we're kind of picking up here again, I guess, with what we've been working through, just the idea of, like family life kind of being chaotic and all of that stuff, and wondering, like, how do we actually maybe seize some of the rhythms of life in order to seek the divine, right? Like, what are those moments that we kind of have that we can look at our lives and sort of model them, at least internally, after kind of like the monastic rhythm, right? Where there's all those different orders and or those different hours and stuff like that. So last episode, we talked about waking up. If you haven't listened to that one, you can go ahead and check that one out. We talked about it and called it First Hour. And so we talked about how those initial moments of the day are really just about getting plugged in to the right story. And I think, it's important to recognize that, like, when it comes to passing on faith to our kids, study after study has really shown that what's most important in the faith lives of children is the faith of their parents. So I think that this is why, it's super essential that we get plugged into the right story, because the narrative structure that we live in then becomes the narrative structure that we pass on to our kids, for better or worse, right? And so I do think that waking up is kind of one of those important moments of saying, like, hey, how do we get plugged into God's story about who we are and about what human beings are even for? So that's kind of where we're at in this series.
Absolutely. Yes. And so I think as the day starts, as you're saying, you have to be plugged into the right story, right? Which implies that there's a wrong story. And actually, there are a bunch of wrong stories, right? Like, there are stories all around us, and we might not think of it that way, but if you stop and consider, what is the story that the world is telling you about? Like, what is the meaning of life? What constitutes a good life? What constitutes success in life, right? There are all kinds of stories out there. And we really need to be contemplating and aware. I want to say intentional, I guess is the right word, right? You want to be really intentional about what story you live by and what story you're giving to your kids, because there are so many options, and most of them are really wrong, honestly. So we're kind of thinking about, like, here at what you would call the third hour, right? So like 9 a.m. Okay. So it's in the morning when it's time to, like, get out of the house. So last week we talked more about your day in the house, your morning in the house. Now we're talking about what happens as you go out into the world and how do you frame it in the right story, right? So Christian, what is one of the wrong stories that we hear? I guess is one of the, I jumped ahead. I always do that.
It's okay. We're just having a conversation. There's no jumping ahead. I don't know what you're talking about. We haven't prepared for this.
All right. So third hour, you're going out in the world, you got your stories, right? But I think, as you mentioned, there's all this research about how kids watch the parents' faith. And that's really what matters in terms of what their faith life will look like. And I just want to point out, like, it's not just like, oh, did your parents go to church on Sunday? Then you'll go to church on Sunday, right? It's really, did your parents have a satisfying, like a visibly meaningful religious life? And if so, if their spiritual life fed them, then the kids are going to be so much more likely to want to be fed in that way, right? But it's very much, I don't know, I think as Orthodox, we have so many external things that we could be doing that it feels like, oh, I have to do all the things. It's not really just that. It's that those things have to really matter and have to benefit you, and they have to see it, right? On and on
Yes.
all
Yeah.
those years.
Well,
Yeah.
and again, it's the question of why. Like, why are we doing these things? Is the point to say 100 Jesus prayers? No, like that's not the point. The point is, how do we plug ourselves into the story of the Christ who is continually coming into the world, and how do we put ourselves right in the way,
Yeah.
of meeting Him and letting His love surround us as we head out into the world. And this is particularly important around 9 a.m. because we're all going different directions. Like, we don't have, the same thing all the time. I mean, at some point, like, someone has to go somewhere else, whether it's to school or to work or to the gym or whatever. And the whole point is that this story needs to influence and impact every moment of our lives. That's where we need to find ourselves, is in this cosmic story of love. And so the reality is, however, as we go out, like, we are confronted with all kinds of competing stories about the world and about who we are and about what we're for. So I do think that, yeah, it does help to look at what some of those stories might be, right? Because it is hard to stay in that story that we woke up to back in the first hour. It's really easy to just kind of get conscripted into something else as we're taking care of all of our human responsibilities. And I do think that this is something that an author that I've really loved for quite some time, James K.A. Smith, talks about, kind of through the framework of what he calls cultural liturgies. And he does this in books like You Are What You Love and Desiring the Kingdom. And they're just fantastic books that really, I think, can help us understand a lot about who we are and how things impact us and how they form us. But he talks about these kind of embodied practices that we undertake throughout the day that shape us in some way toward a particular vision or end of what it means to be human and what it means to live a good life. And these are things that affect us even below the level of our conscious awareness, right? Like, these are things that impact us on a gut level. They seep into us, into our bones. It's not even something that, like, our brains consciously register. Like, the more we learn about how human beings operate, it's more that we're sensing, feeling, emoting beings before we are even thinking beings. So that is really important, I think, to recognize that what we do and where we go does impact the way we live. And so, yeah, we start our day by waking up, but that's not enough. We have to stay awake. We have to be on guard. What the fathers call, like, a state of nepsis, right? Like, the kind of internal vigilance that we need to have in terms of seeing that there are things that are trying to capture our heart and trying to shape us toward nefarious ends. And that's hard. It's hard to do because it's so easy to lose our humanity amidst really, really enticing stories. So one of the big stories I think that I want to kind of touch on, is a false narrative about human beings, and it's one that's everywhere, is that of individualism. And I think our individualism is one of those stories that we need to be on guard for. So maybe I'll tee that up there and ask you, how would you define individualism yourself?
When I was younger, I would have defined it as this really positive, wonderful thing, this thing that defines America. It is so, of individual rights, right? But as you come into Orthodoxy and you come to understand how much we are saved in community, how important, like when we say communion, right? I think a lot of times we think it's just communion with God, but it's really communion with one another, right? But so instead of this vision of communion, we have a vision of individualism, and it's like, I belong to me. I am myself. Everything I have is a result of my decisions, of my actions, of my talents, all these things. And so I'm here in the world sort of alone, even spiritually alone, right? And ultimately, my responsibility is to myself. And so it's maybe for me to live up to my full potential, right? Or to be a good person. It sounds like a good thing, but ultimately it's really just that I'm responsible to me for making my way in the world and making sure that my life turns out well and sort of fulfills whatever vision I have of goodness, right? And so of course the problem is, in Christianity, we know, right? Like, it's not good for man to be alone. One Christian is no Christian, right? We have all these statements that are trying to tell us that we're meant to be living together and loving one another. And instead, when we're living really with this sense of our separateness from everyone else, our individuality, it leads to like this competition with the other individuals, right? So instead of us lifting one another up, it's like a competition. Like if you're driving in your car, actually, I had a therapist one time told one of my kids, she was very anxious and she was starting to drive, and she was like, you can't think of the cars as people, right? Like you can't be stopping and thinking about what the car is thinking and what it's going to do. And don't think about the driver, just think about the car. And it's sort of an interesting, she's right. It would be kind of paralyzing to really think of them as people with feelings and lives and all this going on. But it's a good example. It's a good example of how in this world, we're just like, we're in our little bubble and we're going forward, and everybody else is like an obstacle, right? Like I need to get around you. I need to get ahead of you. I need to get in front of you. And, we might cut people off and not think of them as people. We might, if someone's going too slowly, we get very frustrated with them. They're in your way. They're slowing you down, right? But it's not your way. It's the road. It's everyone's road. Just like it's everyone's way. But they're in your way, and it makes us feel like, I would say, we're aware that there are other people, but we're the main character, right? They're all either supporting characters or NPCs, and they just don't like. And in the worst case scenario, they become obstacles. They become objects to be manipulated to get us ahead, and it's problematic, and I don't know. I think it's funny because I feel like, again, in our culture, we think of individualism as a really good thing. And I just don't, it's just not really compatible with a truly Christian life.
Yeah, and you can see like even like that the example of the car, right? Like that's something that happens on a subconscious level. Like we don't even actively go into our car thinking like I need everyone to get out of my way because where I need to get is the most important thing. Like it just is. It's part of the story of driving on the highway is that like I have somewhere I need to go, and like this person is going too slow or whatever, and it will shape the way we live our lives. Like even last night, in a very kind of weird turn of events in Arizona, we had rain. It was amazing. And so there was like thunder and lightning and wind. So we had this like storm coming through, which was, I think, is beautiful. I'm always really excited when it happens. But my 8-year-old was really scared by it, and this was like I was trying to put her down for bed, and she was up way too late. And, the later she's awake, the more feelings she has about everything. So she's coming out of the room scared and nervous. And I'm trying to read my book about inner healing. Like I'm reading a book about inner healing, about becoming like Christ, about being patient, about not letting your past influence your present. This book by Father Joshua McCool. And with every moment that she was coming out, I kept finding myself thinking, stop getting in the way of my inner healing. You know what I mean? It was like this weird like moment of being like, wait a minute. And I had to like look at her, and I internally had to remember, like, I'm not on the freeway right now. Like this is not my way. Like she is my way. She is the way for me. Like in this moment, this is the moment for me to come out of myself, to stop having, whatever the internal drive is that I think that I should have to achieve or accomplish this book or whatever. Like what she needs and what I want are not in competition with one another. Like, why do I have to continue to see like her fear as competitive against what I want to do? So I think you're right. This is, really dangerous because it's utterly isolating. In the story of individualism, if I'm my own and if I belong to myself and I'm responsible for paving my own way and creating my own value and meaning and growth and whatever, then it does necessarily pit me against somebody else. When when what they want stands in opposition to what I want, now we're having to vie for the top spot. But I do think you're right. The Christian story, we have to remember, is not one of individuality or competition. It's one of community, and it's one of cooperation that is based in self-sacrifice. So if we're not careful, even something as simple as like going to work, right, can easily paint us in the story of individualism and this individualistic pursuit, which, I do think is kind of part and parcel of another story that I think we need to be on guard against, is that of kind of like what I'm thinking of as like up and to the right progress, that like we kind of always need to be progressing or moving in some direction of efficiency or growth or productivity, or something, right?
Yeah.
Accomplishment in some capacity.
Right.
And
You always
really, I
got to
mean,
be
this
better.
is
You're bettering yourself all the time, right? Like you got to read that inner healing book because you're going to be a better man after you read it, right?
yes,
Like it's totally
exactly.
that. It's totally that. Absolutely.
So
Well, at the
shut up
end,
and go to bed, kid. Yeah.
right? Exactly. So it's true though. It's distracting because you get so focused on the task, right? And then everything else is an interruption. All the human beings become interruptions. But we
Yes.
do, I think we feel, I like that phrase, up into the right progress. I like it very much. I've never heard that before, but it makes me picture a man like at a business meeting with a big presentation board and he's got like the up and to the right chart
Hmm.
and it means he's done a great job. He's done fantastic,
Yeah.
but it's true. That's our economic system, right? Like that's the whole system is we should always be growing. The economy always has to be growing, right? Like they're always on the news. It's like, oh, the economy grew by 0.04%. Like, oh, good. Everything has to always be bigger, always has to be more. And so we start to feel like, we're always supposed to be growing. We're supposed to make more money. You got to be more successful. You got to be more efficient. You got to, come up with a newer, better way all the time. And, uh, and, and we feel like we're rewarded for that, right? I mean,
Hmm.
we're
And we
not
feel
rewarded.
bad if we like rest, if we stop, if we're just like,
Yeah.
I
You
can't
better
clean
have
the
a
dishes
good
today. Like,
reason.
I just can't do it. Yeah.
Yeah. There better be a real good reason if you're not making forward progress today. Because it's
Yes.
all about that, right? But and yeah, you get a raise, you get a promotion, you get a Christmas bonus, something like that, right? You're always working toward this reward and you feel like it's going to make your life better. And I think part of it is the money and part of it is really just the idea of I've done well. Like I got those accolades,
Yeah.
and it's,
Well,
it's
and
really
part of the
important.
reason I think that's the case is because that's been instilled in us since we were children. Like you get rewarded for a good performance at school. You get praised for being beautiful. You're admired when you do well, in a baseball game or whatever. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong about like pointing out people's accomplishments or like, saying, hey, you really did great. But
Yeah.
what this does is feed that performance based narrative, right? That like we are what we do. Somehow we are our
Mhm.
ability to contribute to um, some sort of like up and to the right progress, or even some of like the language that slips out when we interact with our kids is like if they misbehave at dinner, like we think like, oh, they were so bad. Or if they, and again, misbehaving is of course really relative because like a 3-year old can't do anything but act like a 3-year old, right? Like 3-year olds, they're like squirrely and they're weird and whatever. And they're not bad. They're just like kids. And so we kind of even internally think of them as bad kids when they do these things or good kids when they do that thing, or ourselves. We think of ourselves as good and bad based on this. And so we do come to value everything that we do based on our performance. I mean, even the way that we consider, we have this really wonderful saying, time is money, right? And when we're in a performance based narrative, we really are only as good as our last success. But the problem here for us is that what this does to the human being is ultimately makes the human being a machine, right? Like someone who needs to crank out something for the sake of supporting the great God of the economy. Like that, this is the system that we find ourselves in, and we measure our success based on the number in our bank account or whatever we have in our stock portfolio or what comes on our paycheck. Like this becomes the measure of the good life, and so we compare ourselves to others, either in a way that we feel ashamed because we don't have as much as they do or we're not as successful as they are,
Mhm.
or we think we're better than other people because we have a higher paying job or whatever. But at the end of the day, it all ultimately leads, if we're always looking to go up and to the right, to a space of feeling like what we have isn't good enough, that we're not good enough, that this isn't good enough, that we need to do better, more, grow, whatever. And
Mhm.
that's a really toxic narrative.
Yeah. I mean, it's the enemy of contentment, right? Like
Mm,
you can't ever be happy because it's never quite good enough. It's never as good as the next guy. That comparison to other people is just completely toxic and damaging and difficult. It's interesting. I read a while back and I have a lot of family in Denmark. So I asked them about this and it's true. Up there, if you meet someone at a party or something, you would never say, what do you do? And they always notice about us that we ask each other about our jobs all the time, because we're constantly like judging each other by, whether we know it or not, by like, what is your career? Oh, that sounds like something that a really smart, successful person does. And you probably make a lot of money. Automatically, you've moved up. And then somebody else moves down. And stay-at-home moms know this, because we'll go to a cocktail party and you'll be asked what you do. And if you say you're a stay-at-home mom, there's a lot of like, oh,
Good for
okay then.
you.
Like, wow, okay.
That must be hard.
I went to a high school reunion and said that I was a stay-at-home mom. And this guy at my high school, who actually wasn't particularly smart or successful or anything, just looks at me and he goes, well, am I remembering wrong? I thought you were smart. And I was like, what? And he goes, weren't you like valedictorian? I'm like, yeah, I'm just like a smart mom. It was just so funny, because it was like, wow, like he wasn't smart enough to know not to say that. Most people are smart enough not to say that, but how many of us think it, right? Like, that's terrible. But it's just,
Good grief.
yeah. But it is really hard, because we just start to think of ourselves as like, if what we're doing doesn't produce money, if it doesn't earn a paycheck, if you can't cash it in for something, then what is its value? Right? It's of no value. It's nothing. It's time wasted. It's energy wasted. And that's
And there could always be more, right? Like one of my teachers, I remember talking about what he called the mythical $2,000, and we start thinking like, yeah, like, okay, yeah, we have enough money, but like, if only we had another $2,000, then we could repair the roof. And if only we had another $2,000, then maybe we could get another car. Like, and there's always just like that extra, if we had another $2,000. And it reminds me of that story, right? When Norman Rockefeller, like the, you know, early oil baron, was like asked once by a reporter, how much money is enough money? And he just kind of calmly responds, just a little bit more, right? Like that's enough money, just a little bit more. And that is, I think,
yeah.
the world that we end up living in is like just a little bit. If I only had a little bit more, and there's always a little bit more.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And no matter who you
we,
are, right? You could have a big, beautiful house and a beautiful family. You got all the nice cars, but it's like, you know what? If we had just like a little bit more, we could have a slightly bigger house, or maybe a vacation home, or maybe there's
Mhm.
always something more. And it
I could
just
get that
goes and
jet
goes
ski,
forever.
and wouldn't that be fun for the kid? I mean, we always think about like what
Yeah.
else we need to do to
Yeah.
have. But again, we lose our humanity because we're not machines. We're not machines that are just capable of cranking out all kinds of things. We're people who are made in God's image. We're not just created for work and productivity. We're also created for rest and delight and contentment and gratitude. And our value is not based on our paycheck, right? And I think this
Right.
is part of the whole story of Christ, is recognizing that he doesn't just
Yeah.
come to build up the well-to-do, right? In fact, he actually is consistently and pretty intentionally seeking out those on the margins of society and lifting them up. And you see this right out of the gate, in his own messiahship, where he stands in the synagogue and reads from the scroll of Isaiah, saying, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of the sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed." So it's actually a fulfillment here of what it means to be God's promised one, to vindicate those who are at the bottom of the social stratosphere,
Yeah.
to lift up those who are not productive or who are not at the top of the social hierarchy. And it's tough, because
Yeah.
we so frequently resist that reality of what it is to be Christ.
Well, and when Christ came to the earth, right, he entered into poverty, right? I mean, he's
Mm-hmm.
born in a manger, not in a palace, right? Like I'm always pointing out to my kids, right? Like the King of Kings should be in a palace. That's what we think on earth. And he's trying to show you that that is not riches. That's not wealth. That's not good for you. It's not,
Mm.
it's not what benefits us and what helps us become truly human. And so anyway, but yeah, it's dangerous, because we're constantly, when you're always looking for more money, you're never like settling in and just being grateful for what you have, being grateful for your family, being connected, being relaxed, and doing, as you said, all these things that we're designed to be able to do, all of these things. And we've got this like unhealthy, um, focus on just this one part where it's like, okay, you can be productive and you can make things, but also you can do all these other things, right? But the flip side to that story is that like we have the consumer narrative, right? So you have, on the one hand, you're supposed to be productive, you're supposed to make money. On the other hand, you're supposed to spend money. And we have like all of this media, advertising. It's not just advertising though, right? But it's like, as you're going through your life could always be a little bit better if you had this other thing, right? Like if you were better looking. So we've got this skin cream, or we've got this different shampoo, or we've got this other thing. We've got these clothes, we've got whatever it is. And it can look like really good stuff. Like it could be, if you subscribe to this app, it's going to help you exercise more, and that's going to make you healthier. Like who's against being in good health, right? Don't be silly. But in the end, it's really just you spending money on another app when you could have just gone for a walk, right? Like you could have walked with your kids and been healthy, but there's just this way that we have of buying into that story that at heart, what we really are is consumers, and that our purpose in this world is always to find the right product, to find the better product. So whatever it is, right? Like if you're looking for status, there are products for that. But if you're looking for health, there are products for that. If you want to be a good parent, there's some really good books you could buy, and there are some wonderful products to get for your kids, and you could put them in this extra expensive school, right? Like there's always a way that we have to exchange our money for becoming a better person in some way.
And what's wild to me too is those narratives that, and marketers are so good at this, right? Because the narratives that they weave are actually deeply, again, violent to the human being. Like they are incredibly violent. So, sometimes when I lead retreats, I'll show like some commercials or whatever, and they're all maybe a little outdated. And I probably need to find some new ones. But a while ago, Maybelline was running an ad about like some sort of like, I don't know, skin product or makeup thing or whatever, which makeup itself is a really interesting word. It's like that's a whole nother thing. But they advertise this as, okay, here's my thought on makeup really quick.
Yeah,
like we use the word makeup to imply a couple things, right? Like makeup is either like imaginary, right? You make up a story. So it's like all pretend. So when you make up your face, you're making a pretend face. Right. So, or you do a makeup assignment because something was missing. And so when you're making up your face, you're making up for something that's missing. And so embedded in the very story of makeup is this idea that either you're lying or something is missing, and that's inherently a shame narrative, right? Like that you're not good enough. What you have is not enough. So you need to make up something else that is there. That's one thing. But then you get Maybelline, who starts selling this product to say, like, here, cover your face with this, and you will have, and these are their words from the narrative, from the commercial, 100% poreless perfection. So what they end up doing is linking the idea of pores in your skin to being imperfect.
Right.
But the thing is, in order to be a human being and not die, you need pores. Like your pores are actually there for your own life. Like, so your skin can breathe and perspire and all of this other stuff, right? And so Maybelline said, the thing that makes you a human being is actually really deeply problematic and you need to cover it. The thing that keeps you from dying, it's wild. And so they make you, feel like, oh, I have this imperfection that somehow I need this product, which is really like an appeal to our sacramental nature, right? Like to go to some other thing to fulfill and complete us, to fill up in us what is lacking. But instead of it being, the body and blood of Christ, it's like this product or whatever. So anyway, that's my tangent on marketing and consumerism and whatever. It's basically selling you a false gospel. Yeah. So, anyway,
that's a pretty good tangent.
But
yeah. But I don't think we're not saying like all makeup is terrible or all products are bad. Don't ever buy anything. Don't participate in the economy, right? Like, of course we have to participate in the economy, but we have to recognize, like, what is the story that I live by?
Yes.
What is it that what do I really think matters? What do I think it means to be a human being? And that's not just like what I say it means to be a human being, but it's what I do. And that's what the kids see, right? Like that's what you leave to your children, is what the story really was to you, not what you tried to tell them on Sunday it
And well,
was.
and vice versa too. I think like not only like it's not just what I do that shows the story, it's like what these things, what my participation in these things does to me. Like
Yeah.
it does something to
Yeah.
me as
Mhm.
well when I'm participating in these narratives, and I have to be on guard. You know, I have to guard my heart against these things that make me
Yeah.
feel like I need more, something else needs to be whatever done, buy more, be better, etc. But this really does, I think, sort of stand in the way of what it means to be a Eucharistic being, which is what we were made for,
Yeah.
to be creatures who are Eucharistize all things.
Right.
And so, thanks. You know, we talk about Eucharist a lot in the church, meaning Thanksgiving, um,
Right.
and that's like a really nice word that we like to kind of throw at it to be like, oh, isn't that nice? But literally, to think of like Thanksgiving is to say, this is good enough. This is good enough for me.
Mm-hmm.
This is enough, etc.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
for some reason, when I say, I don't know, I'm just curious. When I say like, this is enough, this is good enough, it's
Yeah.
good enough.
Good enough
Like,
is,
what does that
yeah,
statement do to you?
you just settled for good enough. Like, right? Like it could have been better. You should have gone for better, but you just settled for good enough. Like, okay, that's nice. You be mediocre. Good for you, mediocre guy. Right? Like that's how we treat the phrase good enough in our culture. Definitely it has negative connotations for sure. And it shouldn't. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Like there should be
Mm-hmm.
good enough. There should be such a thing. Although I mean, I don't know. I think maybe it's just that when we say that you're supposed to be, maybe it's that we know that you're supposed to be trying to be better. You're supposed to be doing something that does progress, but the thing that you're supposed to be doing is like becoming more Christ-like, becoming closer to God, not, I don't know, becoming and being more Christ-like does not mean more productive at all. And it does not mean reading more books because we never saw him really read anything except for the scriptures. And we never saw him like go to work. Although my parents were always like, well, Jesus was a carpenter. We know that he was a carpenter. And it's like, it's interesting because the scriptures actually don't say that he did work. And I think because that's not inherent to your identity. Like God knows that we're overly focused on this problem. He's not going to help us with that. He's going to try to pull us
Yeah,
back to like, no, what really matters is the ministry. What matters is connecting
yeah,
with human beings, connecting with God, right? But yeah, the idea of the Eucharist and the idea of
and
being
that's
great.
yeah.
Oh, just I think it's
Go
always
ahead.
so
Sorry.
interesting. The first time I heard, because I was not always Orthodox, and when I heard that the word Eucharist, Eucharisto, whatever, means thankfulness or gratitude, thanksgiving, is so interesting to me because whenever I've gone through very difficult times in my life, the thing that I really lean on is that it's gratitude that brings us peace, right? It's gratitude that brings us closer to God. And that it is really being able to say, like, even in a bad situation, being able to say, like, thank you, Lord, that you're here with me. Thank you for all of these
Mhm.
blessings. Because when you look out and you see your blessings and you're grateful for them, you're okay. You stop worrying about it. Whereas when you look out and all you see is what you lack and what you think you need, then it's completely disruptive to peace. It's disruptive to connection to one another. It is actually a really, really big deal to be grateful. And we just don't,
Mm.
like you say, we don't feel like we can just say like, wow, this is good enough. Like, thank God for all of this.
Yeah,
This is good.
and I think that that it's actually like to the point of what you were saying, that like if we're trying to, because I think you're right, like we do desire, we have this impulse to grow closer to God, to become more like God. I mean, this is the thing that's, we're told in the beginning that Adam and Eve were made to be like God, to progress in God likeness. But that progression, again, is not a narrative of up and to the right, as we see it in Christ. In fact,
Yeah.
his the path that he shows us is not one of ascent; it's one of descent. Right? It's not a progressing; it's a deepening. It's a going down. It is a finding, even in the depths of my sinfulness, that like there I'm loved, there I am met, there I am, encountered by the living God, who seeks to raise me from the grave. And we avoid so much of the descent because we've been conscripted into this story of up and to the right. Um,
Right.
and there's all kinds of stories, man, that we can probably dig into, but I think that these are
Yeah.
big ones that maybe we need to hold in mind as we
Yeah.
consider what it actually looks like then as we head out into the world, carrying the story of God with us.
So I guess just kind of really at the end of the day, there's probably a lot of stories that we could point to here, but these are, for me at least anyway, some of the big ones I think that we need to pay attention to. Kind of finding ourselves in for now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main thing is to be aware of it. The main thing is I think sometimes we forget that there are various narratives and that it's our job to be intentional about one of them.
Yeah.
So that's good.
And so we're going to go ahead.
Maybe next time we talk about how to do that. We'll get more specific because this is kind of an abstract episode, right? But next week, I feel like we'll do something a little more concrete about how you actually sort of head out from your home at the third hour and what you do.
Yes. Yeah. I think that sounds like a really great plan. And so,
Excellent.
Pay attention to what those stories are that you all find yourselves in. And we're going to keep trying to do that ourselves. And we're all in this together, I think is really kind of where we're trying to go with this whole thing.
We should say, we are going to try to do that ourselves.
Yes, exactly.
We sometimes
all right.
Like everybody.
Well, Elissa, how can people find you?
You know what? The best thing is to go to my website, ElissaBjeletich.com. There's a contact form there. You can contact me. I have a Facebook page and stuff. I don't check the messages as often as perhaps some people do. So probably that's the best thing. How about you, Christian?
Well, I'm not on the socials or anything like that. But as the director of ministry for OYM, Orthodox Youth and Young Adult Ministries, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at the OYM Official, or head over to our website, theoym.org. That's THEOYM.org. You can join our mailing list and see what else we've got coming down the pipeline.
Nice. Very nice. And keep in mind, we would love to hear from you. You can even go to our podcast page on Ancient Faith, and there's a contact link there, actually. And you can send an email that'll be forwarded to us. And of course, there's always the SpeakPipe link where you could actually record a message, and your message may very well be played right here on this amazing podcast.
Yes, exactly.
You just may be laughing and amazing. Yes. You're like, on this podcast. It may be played
co-hosted by popular podcaster Elissa Bjeletich Davis.
It works. You say that, people think you're popular. It totally works. Oh yeah, I got all kinds of tricks for you.
All right, friends. Until next time, peace and every good thing.
This has been a listener-supported joint presentation of OYM, Orthodox Youth and Young Adult Ministries, and Ancient Faith Radio.